and crowds came to hear her preach. And it was rather a small hall, so they were all standing outside with their noses glued to the window panes, flat on the windows, and Maud said she didn't know how she kept a straight face, because it was so funny to see all these noses all the time she was taking the service.
Maud Royden never fulfilled her ambition to become an Anglican priest. A conference to discuss women's ordination, at which she was due to speak, had been scheduled for 1914. But it was overtaken by events, which would prove as The First World War changed the Church of England forever. At first, the leaders of the Church enthusiastically backed the war with Germany. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Randall Davidson, wrote,
"No household or home will be acting worthily if it keeps back any of those who can loyally bear a man's part in the great enterprise on the part of the land we love."
Conscription wasn't introduced until 1916, so thousands of young men needed to be persuaded to volunteer. Many clergy felt it was the moral duty of the established church to encourage them to go off and fight.
The only way in which people could be persuaded to go into the army was through very strong patriotic recruiting appeals, and this meant that the Germans had to be portrayed as devils, as antichrist, as subhuman, and these recruiting appeals were often laced with stories about German atrocities, some of which, of course, were true, but many of which were fabricated.
News came through of the atrocities of the Hun in Belgium and the invasion and the raping of the whole country. And, of course, we were quite concerned about that being against all the rules of cricket.
Donald Hodge joined up in 1914. The atrocity stories appealed directly to those, like him, whose morality had been moulded by the Anglican Church.
The Church of England school that I went to was governed by the vicar and the squire and so on, and part of our duty was to learn the catechism. My duty towards God, my duty towards my neighbour. Duty was spelt with a capital D. My mother was the most peace-loving woman that ever lived, and her fondest hope was that she'd never have a son who was a soldier. But when I told her that it was my duty, she never raised a word of objection.
Arthur Winnington Ingram, the Bishop of London, was a leader in the call to arms. At one mass rally, he called for British soldiers to
band in a great crusade to kill Germans. To kill the good as well as the bad. To kill the young men as well as the old. To kill them, lest the civilization of the world should itself be killed.
10,000 men volunteered as a result of just one of his speeches. In his diary, the bishop proudly noted,
"The exodus from all the church choirs, the church lads' brigades, the church scouts, and the ranks of the servers has been enormous."
The tide of anti-German hysteria swiftly engulfed any clergy who swam against it. Churches became targets of mob violence when pacifists or conscientious objectors sought sanctuary in them. And the clergy, who were forbidden by the Military Service Act from joining up as combatants, became targets as well.
Little boys used to run along the streets pointing to priests saying, "Kitchener wants you." And there was a feeling that if the clergy were truly patriotic, they wouldn't be in their parishes, but they would be serving as soldiers at the front.
The only option for the clergy was to join up as military chaplains, and they did so in their thousands. But nothing in their backgrounds had prepared them for what they would experience. One of the keys to understanding what happened lies here in London's Imperial War Museum. In its archives is a report written in 1919 by a senior chaplain describing the experiences of padres at the front. But the author, Canon Cross, didn't just produce a report. He produced an indictment of the attitude of chaplains like himself as they went off to war.